Hi and welcome. My name is Laura Kovacs, and I'm the e-learning coordinator for Project Wisdom at Immigrant Services here in Guelph. Project Wisdom is an elder abuse awareness initiative that aims to build healthy relationships for immigrant seniors. And we would like to begin by recognizing that June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Due to the rapid growth of the aging population, the United Nations General Assembly has acknowledged the importance of recognizing that elder abuse is a global issue that happens internationally. And on today's show, we will hear from Shelley O'Connor and Laura Sullivan from the Seniors at Risk Community Response Network of Guelph, Wellington. Shelley O'Connor is the Vulnerable Seniors Community Service Lead at the network, and she is here to speak with us today to share her expert advice on the topic of elder abuse. And Laura Sullivan is a clinician from the Seniors at Risk Community Response Network. The Response Network is a collaborative, local, multidisciplinary approach that deals with the abuse of older adults and works with health and social services and police services here in Guelph.
My name is Shelley O'Connor. I coordinate services for seniors living in the community, and the programs that I'm involved in really trying to address the risks that seniors are experiencing. So I have oversight for a program that provides workers that go and work one-to-one with the seniors. I have a program that works with older adults when there is a cognitive impairment, like a dementia, and we have workers that will go out and try and help them manage that. And I also oversee and help develop the Seniors at Risk program, which deals specifically with seniors who are being abused. I was hired probably about almost 15 years ago because what was happening in this community was that agencies were being called about situations of abuse, and nobody really knew how they were supposed to respond. What was the role of the police? What was the role of the doctor, the nurse, some of the community agencies? So my job was to bring everybody together and look at how this community could work together to help seniors who were in difficult situations. And so we brought the police, the healthcare agencies, the social service agencies, some of the informal agencies like people who provide recreation services, church groups, together to say, okay, if Mrs. Smith is in difficulty, how are we going to help her? And we spent probably, 10 years developing a more collaborative response, which involved training people, giving them education on what elder abuse looked like and how best to help an older adult, always putting the older adult at the center so that we were not telling that senior what they needed to do, but helping them get out of a bad situation or how to manage a bad situation. I think the reason why it takes time to develop a response to elder abuse is because it's a very complicated issue. There is really no one agency that can help a senior with all the things that are associated with elder abuse. Because elder abuse can be about their money, it can be about their housing, it can be about their relationship with their adult children, it can be about their health, if they're being neglected. And there's no one agency that does all that. So we really need to work together. And it takes a long time because people are used to doing just what their job says they're supposed to do. And elder abuse really pushes people into the gray area. It's not a black and white issue. 15 years ago when I started, if I held a session, come and learn about elder abuse, very few people come. It's a very difficult issue. And because elder abuse really, over 90% of the situations we see involve family members, nobody wants to talk about it. It's very difficult to talk about it. And the term elder abuse, in some language, doesn't even exist as a term. So it's hard to get people's heads around the term itself. What I've done with elder abuse as a term is I've really started to talk about broken relationships. Because elder abuse really is about how healthy relationships break down or how bad relationships result in people being hurt. And that's really the focus we've used to try and move this forward. And I think over the last 15 years, provincially and federally, there has been more attention paid to raising awareness of elder abuse. If you think about it like women abuse or seat belts or driving and drinking, where those issues were, 15, 20 years ago, that's where elder abuse is. People are just with the raised awareness, starting to understand that it is an issue and that it is a crime. And once you get to that page, people start to pay more attention. So telling somebody that you're being abused or talking about someone you know that's experiencing elder abuse, it's hard. It's a very difficult, sensitive issue, often very emotional. And so what I tell people is slow it down, let that person know that you are supportive, and just let them talk. And I think it's very important not to try and blame. And one of the things that we've learned, especially since it's often a family member, is you cannot turn to that woman and say, your son's an awful person, because there is a loving relationship that you have to acknowledge and support at the same time that you're trying to help that person be safe. And so we've learned, in terms of trying to get people to talk about elder abuse, that it's really about supporting that person and going in the direction that they want to go, which sometimes is really hard because you see how bad the situation is and you know what you would do, but it's really about what the person wants. And that's where we have to start. So when I started working with the community on this issue, there were very few people, there wasn't anybody at the table that could really speak to the experience of someone whose culture or their language was creating a barrier to them getting help. It was a very white, middle-class kind of community. I think in the first 5 years that I did this work, I might have used an interpreter once. But as the community has changed and we have welcomed more and more diversity into this community, there's been a growing need to look at how do we support people who aren't mainstream, who don't typically go to the Evergreen Center because they don't speak the English language well, or it's uncomfortable given some of their cultural values. So how do we meet their needs? So that's why we launched Project Wisdom, and have worked very closely with Immigrant Services. I think the fact that I think it's 1 in 5 are actually people new to the country. I think that is a huge piece that Guelph has to wrap its head around. Yeah, I think that the change in the community, the growing diversity in Guelph has made community partners stop and say, okay, what do I not know? What do I need to learn? And who are those new partners that I need to work with so that we can ensure that everybody gets the same kind of service? The other thing I would say in terms of the growing awareness that we need to reach out to a broader community is that community partners don't know how to do that. Not that many of them speak more than one language or don't understand different cultures. So it's a two-way street in terms of people growing in understanding, and that's the other reason why we look to Immigrant Services to help us learn how do we reach out to people who are uncomfortable in kind of like the white English system, and how do we learn how to reach out and to make them comfortable and to give them the kind of help that they want. When I talk about elder abuse as really being about broken relationships, what I tell people, how I explain it, is that we are all in relationships. And I always say elder abuse is all about the relationships. And if you look at a mother and her adult daughter, let's say you have to go to a wedding shower on a Sunday or to some kind of family gathering, and as the mom, you don't really want to go, you're tired, you don't feel that well, but the daughter's pressuring you to go. And so you have a discussion about it, and maybe you decide, okay, Mom, I'm going, and if you want to stay home, that's fine. And Mom says, yeah, I'm staying home. That doesn't change the relationship. There isn't any real conflict. You've both been equal people in that discussion, and you make your own decisions. What happens in elder abuse situations is that discussion or equality isn't there. So mom and daughter, for whatever reason, and the reasons we can talk about, there's an imbalance. So let's go back to that situation, and mom is getting frailer. She relies on that daughter to drive her to her doctor's appointments, to get her to the bank, to make sure she has groceries. So mom doesn't want to upset the daughter by disagreeing with her. So when the daughter says, you're going with me, and I don't care if you want to go or not, that's where we start to see abuse, the elder abuse. And it can come in so many different forms, and financial abuse is the one we hear about the most, where in that same situation, daughter says to mom, I need a new car, and you're going to give me the money, or I am no longer going to drive you anywhere, and I'm not going to get groceries for you, and you're going to be stuck here by yourself. Mom gives the money for the car. So that's the financial abuse. But in that abuse, there's also emotional abuse, because she's threatening. There could be physical abuse if they start to be shoving. There is neglect, not bringing groceries for them to eat. So there isn't one situation of elder abuse where there's just one type of abuse, but it all starts with the relationship. And with a mother and daughter, there's also that I'm the mom. It's my job to take care of the daughter. So no matter how nasty she is to me, I need to take care of her. So we see lots of situations where the mom chooses to be treated badly because what's most important to her is the relationship. So when do you know when, as a person who's watching some of this happen, when you should be talking to somebody? So there is no mandatory reporting in Canada right now, or in Ontario. So we really have to follow the direction of the senior in terms of what they want to do. What our role really truly is to support that person, and then to look to try and encourage them to reach out to some of the resources that are in the community to get help. So in that situation with the mother and the daughter, if you're a friend or a neighbor, speaking to her alone and just being honest and saying, I'm concerned about you. Things seem to be not right between you and your daughter. How can I help? And what the other thing you need to realize is that these situations don't happen overnight. They are along a continuum. They've been going on for a while. Things have been changing. So we really, or maybe they've always been this way, and the only thing that's really changed is that mom is no longer able to stand up for herself. So it's not going to change overnight. So we have to start with being supportive and start by trying to help mom see what's happening and follow her direction. When you believe that there's truly risk to that person's health, that they could be very likely harmed, then you should be talking to somebody. So it is true that if you're the bystander, if you're the person watching this happening, or you're concerned about somebody, it is a difficult thing to watch. And so we do encourage people to talk to somebody. There's you can call up and talk to someone like myself or somebody else who's part of the network, and you can talk about a situation without ever having to say who the person is, unless there's significant risk. If you've seen a situation where somebody's threatened to kill somebody, you really need to seek out help and let the professionals handle how that falls out. But if you just need to talk because you're worried about Mrs. Smith and you don't know how to help her, call. Because we have often worked with people where we have given them suggestions that they can then take back to the other person to say, did you know that you could just call up and talk to somebody, or you could meet with somebody? You don't have to do anything. But if you just want to talk to somebody about it, because oftentimes it's because people don't think there is any help out there. And they may not want to call up a social worker and say, this is happening to me with my son, a complete stranger. But if we have somebody who has a trusting relationship with that person that we can provide information to, then that information can get to the individual, and maybe she will make a change, make a call. So for communities looking at how do I help the older adults in my community, it's not as big as some of the bigger cities. We don't have all the finances. We don't have all the resources. The first thing I would say to them is elder abuse is happening everywhere. It's across all ages. It's across all income levels. It's across all communities. The doctors, the nurses, the people at the grocery store. Somebody knows somebody who's experiencing some kind of difficulty. So a conversation has to start, and conversations don't cost money. But if you're in a small community and there's only a couple of resources in that community, you need to start talking to each other. Because chances are pretty good that if you're dealing with a situation within your agency or your church group or your staff, that same issue is on somebody else's radar. So rather than, that was the problem we found in the beginning, was that because we weren't talking to each other, people were getting bombarded from different people to try and help them with their problems, rather than, let's talk about this, let's figure out what's best for Mrs. Smith, and let's minimize the number of people that are trying to tell her what to do. In terms of what these smaller communities can do, there are different projects out there where you can get funding for short-term things just to stimulate those conversations and to start to look at how you as a small community might work together. I think we also need to remember that it's not just the professionals that can help a woman or a man who are in difficulty. A lot of these smaller community groups, the bridge group, the church group, the recreation group, the coffee group that gets together at a coffee shop, there are ways that they can start to talk to each other and support people, and when the time is right, reach out to maybe more of a professional. So the issue of ageism is one of my, I'd say one of my core passions, because I truly believe, after doing all these years of looking at the situations of abuse, ageism does play a role in what we're seeing. The way we think about getting older, for instance, people don't want to get old. They see it as a negative. So dealing with issues that are specific to older adults, people kind of stay away from. Social workers going into working in geriatrics, they don't want to do that because they don't think it's going to be as interesting. Whereas the complexity and the richness of a full life is a great area to work in. The situations I see of abuse where the son says, well, give me the money now, you're never going to use it, you're too old, you're not going to need your money, or why don't you give me my inheritance now because it's just going to be mine anyway. That kind of attitude towards older people being useless or not needed, or you don't need it anyway, that plays into elder abuse. Situations where family feel that that person can't think for themselves anymore, that somehow at 75 you no longer can make decisions for yourself just because you're 75. People start to decide how they're going to spend your money, where you're going to live, what kind of treatment you're going to get, when you're perfectly capable of making those decisions yourself. And that people need to be allowed at any age to make those decisions. And we definitely see it in elder abuse, that there's this ageist attitude towards seniors who, once you're a senior, you can't think for yourself, you can't make decisions, you have no value, so it's okay to leave you upstairs in a bedroom without any kind of contact with the outside world because you have nothing to offer. So that is changing. I think it's an awareness piece that's happening. I think it's a demographic shift. But I also think we have a challenge in that seniors and younger people don't interact as much as they used to. We have lots of situations where an immediate family lives somewhere else, and so they are often vulnerable to the neighbor or the person going around and selling new driveway paving because it's a friend, or the telephone solicitors, somebody to talk to. So we have to be careful about that. And the younger generation, because of the mobility of the world now, don't necessarily know their grandparents that well or understand what they have to offer. So we need to make much more effort to bring that intergenerational piece back into the world. So when I talk about ageism and the attitudes people have about older adults, it's not only just the younger people that have those attitudes. We have lots of older adults who think that because they are 75, they shouldn't be driving to that card game, or they shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be doing that, they're too old to try this. And what we tell people is you need to stay active. You need to stay involved and connected to people outside of your family network. So people need to believe more in who they are than in what their age tells them, and that's part of the ageism, because isolation is the number one risk factor for elder abuse. So as people get older and think they can't do things anymore, they are less involved. And with child abuse, one of the reasons why we are able to kind of do more with child abuse is that they're in the school system. We're seeing them on a regular basis. As people get older, their network shrinks. They do less, either because they don't think they should be doing it or they're not able to, and we need to get them, to keep them, to encourage them to stay connected and to get rid of some of those stereotypes around what you can and cannot do as you age. So I think that around elder abuse, people often think that they have to call the police about it. And the police are a great partner, and there are situations where we definitely draw them in. They also, if people don't have any other number and don't know what to do, can call and talk to them. I think we've done a lot of work over the years to help the police see that it's not a criminal code immediately offense that we need to go and act on, that they would call us, maybe do a joint visit. What I would encourage people to do, if you're concerned about someone, talk to one of the agency people that you know. So if we have a number of different agencies in this community that can help. So even in your doctor's office, the family health teams now have social workers and mental health workers. You can talk to your doctor and kind of sort out, is this something that we need to slow down and work on so that we don't ruin a relationship or isolate a person further or put them at greater risk? So could we have a conversation about what their options are? The Seniors at Risk program in Guelph, we are located at CMHA, the Community Mental Health Association, and you can call and speak to myself or to Laura Sullivan, who is our Seniors at Risk worker, and we can go out and do a visit or have a conversation on the phone about what options might be out there. And also encourage, if you're already working with a nurse from a Community Care Access Center, why don't we talk to that nurse so that she can have a conversation with you in a safe place or in a comfortable place rather than you having to come into the office? Is there somebody else already involved that we could support? Somebody else already coming into the home so that if it's a son that you're worried about, that there aren't going to be any red flags raised, that nurse is coming in. What's she coming in to talk about? But if we have a chance to talk to her, then she can work with your mom to try and help her understand what her options are. So there are lots of agencies, including the police, who now will have a conversation and then sort out what is the best way to approach this. But you need to understand that with the police, they are going to err on the side of safety. So if what you're telling them tells them that person's at immediate risk, they are going to act. Otherwise, we're looking at who is the best in this community to have that conversation, to start to explore what could be done. And Immigrant Services is a perfect example. If the relationship is with that settlement worker, that's who we're encouraging you to talk to, and then we will support that settlement worker.
Let's hear from one of Canada's legends, Buffy St. Marie. She is a singer, songwriter, visual artist, educator, and activist. Now into her 70s, she continues to perform across the globe. This song is called Still This Love Goes On from her 2009 album, Running for the Drum.
Sat beside a beaver dam and watched the winter grow. Ice was hard with little tracks appearing on the snow. Fog is in the valley now and all the geese have gone. Across the moon I saw them go, and still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. Once I saw the summer flowers turn the fields to sun. Up and down the mountainside I watched the summer run. Now the fields are muffled in white and snow's on the dawn. Morning comes on shivering wings, and still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. In every dream I can smell the sweet grass burning. In my heart I can hear the drum and hear the singers soaring and see the jingle dancers. And still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. In every dream I can smell the sweet grass burning. And in my heart I can hear the drum and hear the singers soaring and see the jingle dancers. And still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. fancy dancer come up north to see some friends of his. Fell in love in a powwow town, and you know how that is. Beaded girls and painted ponies turn your life around. Now you're singing, yes, I hear it. On and on, on and on and on and on. And in every dream I can smell the sweet grass burning. And in my heart always hear the drum and hear the singers soaring and see the jingle dancers. And still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. And still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on. And still this love goes on and on. On and on and on and on. And still this love goes on and on. Still this love goes on.
So I'm Laura Sullivan. I work with the Canadian Mental Health Association through at Delhi Street with the Seniors at Risk program. So I'm actually a clinical consultant with the program. And generally what I do is take phone calls. The phone calls can be from anyone in the community. Lots of times they are from other healthcare professionals. They can be from police, they can be from lawyers, can be firefighters, and also people in the community. And my role really involves coordinating a response to elder abuse circumstances. So whether that's pulling in different healthcare professionals, whether it's participating in a case conference, whether it's pulling in police, it's really about going from where that client is at in terms of coordinating a response. So we get a variety of different calls on the Seniors at Risk line. So anybody can call in. A lot of calls are from the healthcare professionals. So we may get calls from doctors. We may get calls from lawyers, different people in the community, police. We do get calls from clients themselves. So a lot of times those are cold calls where the client will call in and say they have a case that they'd like to discuss. They were maybe given my name through the church. And they have something going on in their lives that they want to come in and talk about. And I will meet with them typically face-to-face at the office. We also do get calls from friends and neighbors. So sometimes we'll get calls from neighbors in an apartment building that say, you know what, I've heard some noises above us in the building, and I'd like to come in and just talk to you about what I've heard. So we do get calls from friends. We also get calls from families. Family members sometimes may be concerned about an elderly parent or a relative. So depending on whether or not the person knows that they've been called in about, I'll either meet with the family or I'll invite them all to come in and meet with me together. And then we go from there and develop a service plan. So when you're thinking about elder abuse, I always think about it in kind of a global context. So it's really talking about anything that feels uncomfortable for that senior. So any unwanted advances, any use of money or funds without consent or permission. Neglect is often one of the most difficult forms of elder abuse because it's the absence of something. So neglect is always the most difficult to prove, but it's also one, unfortunately, that we see very commonly. And it's a form of elder abuse that tends to be picked up on by people who are in that person's circle. So it may be picked up by the healthcare team or friends and family. Elder abuse also can depend on whether or not the person is capable. So when you have a capable person, we treat it the same way as we would, say, any 35-year-old, 40-year-old man or woman who has a concern with abuse. But when we're looking at elderly people, they're not always capable. So they may have a dementia or another condition that makes them not capable of understanding what's happening to them. In that case, they're more vulnerable. So when we're looking at an incapable person, the definition of elder abuse changes slightly in that we have to consider that vulnerable person's previous wishes and the vulnerable person's safety. So it's really then a matter of talking with people who knew that person and who would have a good sense of what their former wishes were, and also taking into consideration the needs of that person and the safety. So if we have a call from a neighbor that's, say, concerned, they have a senior that they're living next to or nearby, They see a family member coming and going after the visits. The person seems upset, or they may hear things from upstairs or through the walls. By all means, give us a call. There's no call that's not important. There's no reason that's too small. So generally, if a neighbor would call in, what we would do is try to collect as much information from that neighbor as we can. So do they know the person's name? Do they know the name of the person that's visiting? What kinds of things are they hearing? What are they seeing? Most importantly, does the person that they're concerned about know that they're calling? And then depending on the answer to that, that's where the next steps come from. So if the person is not aware, generally then what I might do is pay that person a visit, knock on the door and explain to them that I've had some concerns, that I work with seniors at risk, and I just would like to talk with them to see if they have any concerns themselves. And again, it's really in that meeting with the person face-to-face, looking at, is this person capable of understanding and appreciating that they may be at risk, or are they vulnerable? We get a variety of responses from people. So sometimes in a cold call, when we just knock on the door because maybe a neighbor has expressed concerns, sometimes we find that the person is actually relieved. So they'll let us in, we'll have a good conversation, and we can go from there in terms of coming up with a service plan. Other times the person can be offended. They're annoyed that somebody has called in on their behalf. And in those cases, what I try to do is give them some education on elder abuse. So this is what elder abuse is. This is the definition of it. Somebody has called in with the following concerns. And then again, try to do a bit of an assessment of, is this person capable of understanding and appreciating the consequences? If they are, then any decision to become involved with us and to engage in next step is 100% up to that person. If they are more vulnerable and we're perceiving that there may be a risk there, then it's really trying to gently engage that person into some conversation. Talking with the perceived abuser is a big part of what we do, and it really depends. There are so many different forms of elder abuse, and there are many different reasons for it. So sometimes the abuser is really just simply not aware of their roles and responsibilities if they're acting on someone else's behalf. Sometimes there might be financial incentives for somebody to, say, take advantage of a senior. So we really do try to wrap around the system. In some cases, the perceived abuser has addiction issues. So where we can, we try to offer support to both the person being abused and to the abuser. We also try to make the abuser aware of consequences. So elder abuse now is not okay. We do try to make them aware that they need to change their behavior, and at times, if necessary, we will involve police and we will proceed with a charge. We see a lot of really tough scenarios. We see, unfortunately, a lot of scenarios where it might be that elder's own family member that is committing abuse in some form, whether it's fraudulent, so whether they are in a position of trust and they have basically taken all of the person's money, all of their retirement savings, or whether they're in a position of trust and they're actually neglecting. Sometimes I find those ones the most challenging. We've had cases where we have seen, for example, the person who is perceived to be doing the abuse is living with the elder in the elder's home. So there's some incentive to keep the elder at home, otherwise the perceived abuser has to find a place to live. So unfortunately, we've seen some of our seniors have multiple hospital admissions where they've presented at the hospital malnourished or dehydrated, sometimes even with broken bones, where the perceived abuser has really tried to keep them at home. Those ones I find really challenging because there's always a dynamic between the family that we haven't been there to participate in. So when you're looking at seniors, you're looking at people that are 70, 80, 90 years old, and to just come in not knowing that family dynamic and the history makes working with these situations challenging. Language can sometimes be a barrier. We've actually had a number of cases where, particularly with immigrants coming in, where they do not speak any English at all, and the people that do speak English are the people that there are concerns about that may be the perceived abusers. So in those situations, what we try to do is work through immigrant services. We try to work with an interpreter. Usually what I would do is meet with the interpreter first to really go over the sensitivity of the scenario and try to learn a little bit too about that person's customs, about the important things that matter to them. So it may be before I go out talking with other people who know that individual, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a healthcare worker. Sometimes the interpreter already has a relationship with that person. to really try to be sensitive to the needs and to open the communication up. I think with elder abuse, it's important to remember that a person is still capable. So there's a lot of assumptions that because somebody is a senior, they're not capable of making their own decisions. So the first thing really when talking about elder abuse and creating an awareness is to remember that people are capable and people do have the right to make decisions that other people may deem as poor judgment. So if a person is capable, they have a right to decide whatever course of action just the same way as somebody who's younger. It's really that more vulnerable population where we become concerned about, and that's the population that I think really needs to be reached out at in terms of awareness for elder abuse. So it's really looking at who the people are that are around the individuals. So it's training, sometimes what we refer to as gatekeepers. So people at the banks. And fortunately, we're getting more and more calls now from people at banks around the issue of fraud. So it's people like banks, doctors, even grocery store tellers. We have had some call. People that interact with seniors on a day-to-day basis that may pick up some of those early warning signs. So for example, a banker might call if they see a client coming in and they've got a relative with them and there's an increase in the number of withdrawals that the senior's making. Sometimes people from the grocery store will recognize that a senior's having difficulty even when they're in the line, and that they're maybe being directed by somebody. So I really think it's getting the message out there that we as a community, it's our responsibility to look out for elder abuse, because for those vulnerable people, they are at risk of having it happen to them. People do have a difficult time coming forward with elder abuse, especially people where the abuser or the perceived abuser is a child. So really, I think it's very important to get the message out there that elder abuse is wrong. It is a crime. It is to be treated seriously. People have rights. People have a right to lead a dignified life as a senior citizen. So when people have trouble or they're hesitant to come forward, oftentimes I'll meet with them first in a very casual way. So it may be even meeting them in a coffee shop. It may be having them come into the office. And I'll let them know what their options are. We try to work from a system where we go from the least intrusive to the most intrusive. And what I'll do is walk a person through the options. So the least intrusive is just that person and I sitting down and talking about the challenge or the problem and trying to think of ways that we can go about reducing the risk. Most intrusive is kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum and may involve a charge. It may involve involving police. So again, we try to start here and try to de-escalate the situation with some support and with some education. I think one of the biggest surprises for me in this area is, it's sad actually how busy I am. I think one of the surprises is that elder abuse does happen, and it happens in all forms, and it's happening right here in our community. And I've seen every form. So I've seen fraud cases where hundreds of thousands of dollars have been stolen. We have seen cases of sexual abuse. We have seen cases of physical abuse where people come in bruised. And certainly we've seen cases of neglect. And I guess the biggest surprise to me is that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it's somebody in a position of trust that is the perceived abuser. And I think that's very sad. It makes me more cautious. It makes me want to educate people more about the roles and responsibilities of power of attorney. I think too that I've also learned with the more vulnerable senior, so with that senior with dementia, they're really very isolated, they're very shut in. It's very hard for them to come into us, so it's a matter of how do we provide outreach, how do we encourage them to come forward, and how do we work with the community to encourage really everyone to keep an eye out. So dementia in the context of elder abuse is particularly tricky because sometimes what you're working with is a couple that's been married for 60, sometimes maybe 70 years, and you have the onset of dementia. And maybe they've had a great, very loving relationship for those years. The onset of dementia can change a person's personality. So you suddenly have somebody that has aggressive tendencies where they were never aggressive before. We've seen cases where they would get right up in the spouse's face, yelling, swearing, raising fists. And the spouse then, the caregiver, is left in a position of what do they do? So this is somebody that they love dearly, but it's also somebody that now they're becoming afraid of. And we've had cases, unfortunately, where there actually have been broken bones. People have been hospitalized because somebody with a dementia has not recognized them and has hurt them. And again, that person is their spouse. Unfortunately, the way the system works now, and this is one of the challenges with the system, is that if a caregiver calls 911 after an incident like that, the police come and the perceived perpetrator is arrested because it is a domestic violence charge. So we're really working to try to figure out a solution to this, whereby we see that person actually get some treatment in a facility, and we see the treatment of the aggression rather than a criminal charge to somebody that perhaps has been kind and gentle and in a loving relationship for 50, 60, 70 years. So the flip side also occurs where we see there's perhaps been a relationship that there's been marital conflict for years, the relationship has been abusive for years. So what we look at in those situations is changes in capacity. So is a person now more vulnerable? Can they still make decisions on their own? So, and again, people have the right to make their own decisions, but if they're developing a dementia, do they still have that insight to keep themselves safe? So 20 years ago, if they were going to be in a situation where they were going to be hit or struck, they might have known to call 911 or to leave and exit the room. Can they still do that? Do they still have that insight? So a big part of what I do is talk with people about safety planning. And if they're not able to safety plan, if a person can't tell me that they would call 911 or leave the room, then we become more involved and we look at a plan, whether it's removing the perpetrator, whether it's getting more eyes on the house, whether it's actually taking that person that we're nervous may be abused and getting them somewhere safe. But we look at becoming much more active. Part of the rewards of working in this capacity is that you do get to see people become safe and get out of abusive situations. We work quite closely with our community partners, so Women in Crisis is a frequent partner of ours. There was an occasion, just as an example, where we were working with a woman who had been in a marital situation where she had been abused for years and years and years, and as they got older, the abuse was becoming actually worse. So this woman was hospitalized and in hospital said to a social worker that she was really worried about going back home. So the social worker called me in. We had a meeting with this woman and her family, who actually were quite supportive. And what we ended up doing is, through the county, they offer an emergency retirement home placement program. So they offer a 2-week stay when this woman's hospital stay was done, where she could go into a safe place so that we would have the time to put a plan together. We actually did some advocacy through Women in Crisis and through Guelph Housing to get her an apartment. And the nice side of the story is that after the 2 weeks, the woman is able to move into that apartment, and she's independent for the first time at the age of being in her 80s. So it is nice to see, it's nice to be a part of a system like that, where we can see somebody go from being in a situation where there's no perceived sense of power to actually coming even towards the end of their life to a situation where they feel that they own it. So working with a senior who's very isolated can be very tricky, and oftentimes it's that person's preference. So, they maybe have all their lives been a more reserved, more private person. So it is tricky then to become engaged when a person has been isolated. So again, it's a very gentle approach. And it's working with that client within their comfort zone. So sometimes what I'll try to do is just the goal becomes just getting in the door, and that's the first step. So it's getting in the door, having a conversation that's really just very low-key. Sometimes these seniors can become depressed, so it's providing some education about depression, assuring them that depression is not a normal part of aging. So in other words, they're not depressed because they're old. There's something happening there that can be treated. And then offering that person gradually, bit by bit, community support. So we do have some excellent supports in the community, including the Intensive Geriatric Service Program, and their role really is to look at that senior that's more isolated and more frail, and their role is actually to help engage that senior in some community services. So there's a number of things we do. It's really case by case, working with that individual according with what their wishes are. There is a common fear out there of long-term care, and I think there's a huge cultural component to that as well. depending on what the person's background is. A lot of the fear is around misconceptions. So people sometimes confuse the idea of a long-term care facility with a retirement home facility. So retirement home facilities are much more like a community where the person has the freedom to come and go. There's lots of activities. They're private residences, so they vary greatly in cost. Long-term care really is more for people that physically need to be there, so they need help with at least one or more activities of daily living, so feeding, dressing, bathing. And really it's looked at as somewhere to go when a person requires the assistance that the community can no longer provide. So yes, there's a lot of fear around it. There's a lot of misconceptions around it. I think the community has come a long way in terms of putting supports in place to address key issues such as depression in a retirement home or a long-term care setting. So again, we try to meet people where they're at. The Intensive Geriatric Service Program can actually take people and give them a tour of some of the facilities just to help maybe with some of those misconceptions that are out there. So I think really one of the things that I've learned in this role is that there is no typical characteristics of who is abused. It can be anybody. So male, female, wealthy, poor. It can be absolutely anybody. It could be your neighbor next door. It's really opened my eyes to see the different people that come in. I think the greatest concern I have is for those people that really don't have a network of support. And again, it's trying to reach out to those people and trying to find kind of who and where they are. But it can be anybody. And you know, it's one thing to sit in a classroom and learn about it in a textbook, but it's another thing to go out and actually to see that it does happen in all forms, and it can happen to any one of us. I think there are a lot of reasons that people don't report. I think shame is a big part of it, particularly if you're looking at family. I think for men in particular, I do think there's a sense of guilt or a sense that you know, they should be able to own this themselves. I think there's a sense of shame there. We do have men come forward. Unfortunately, there are times where for men, it's their spouse who develops a dementia, and it's actually their female spouse who's elderly that is suddenly hitting them or cursing at them or throwing things at them. My guess is that there are probably many more men out there who are recipients of elder abuse that are not coming forward. Family relationships are very complex, and again, when you enter a situation where you're working with a senior, you've got a lifetime of family dynamics that you're working with. So I think in terms of looking at a preventative approach, again, it's just having an open dialogue. I think people, when they drop their power of attorney documents, need to have a very clear conversation with family. A lot of times when we're working with families, it can be really challenging for us as healthcare providers to know what that person's wishes were when they were capable. So it's having a conversation with your family about what does that person want? What would their wishes be in this set of circumstances? Really making clear with the person that they've selected as power of attorney what wishes they want them to follow. I think that would solve a lot of conflict later on when it comes time to make those difficult decisions. I also think with families, if there are some conflicts as the family goes along, mediation is always a really excellent opportunity as well, or family counseling. So, I mean, again, when you look at least intrusive to most involves kind of legal proceedings or police proceedings. But if you backtrack that a bit and engage in some family counseling or even some family mediation, you can stop it before it gets to that point. So we work very closely. So Canadian Mental Health Association is an agency that serves cradle to grave, is what we say. So when we have a situation where we're looking at an adult perpetrator, maybe that has an addiction issue, so they're stealing from mom and dad, they maybe have abusive behavior while they're using substances. Again, my role is really to help support mom and dad, but I also work very closely with our adult service team so that it's not in isolation, so that we also bring somebody in to support that adult. So does the adult, or are they willing to get some help for their addiction? And then really you're going right to the root of the problem. Again, sometimes it's something that just with a little bit of help and a little bit of guidance, we can again stop that path before it gets way down here.
Thank you again for joining us today as we learn more about elder abuse and how we can prevent it within our local community and across Canada. If you are concerned about an older adult, let the community help. Contact Laura or Shelley at 519-843-6191. And if you need language support, you can also call Immigrant Services at 519-836-2222 and speak with a settlement counselor. I want to end with a quote from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. We owe it to older persons and societies at large to fight ageism in all of its forms and enhance the dignity and human rights of older persons everywhere. Here's another song from an incredibly hard-working musician, Hugh Masekela, and his take on Bob Dylan's classic, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, from his latest album, Playing at Work. Hugh Masekela celebrated his 75th birthday this year in New York City with a concert performance at the Lincoln Center.
Stands your orphan with his gun, crying like a fire in the sun. Look out, those things are coming through, and it's all over now, baby. The highway is for gamblers, you better use your sense. Take what you have gathered from coincidence. The empty-handed painter from your streets is throwing crazy patterns on your sheets. The sky too is unfolding under you, and it's all over now, baby. On your seasick sailors, they are rowing home. And all your reindeer armies are all going home. The lover who just walked out your door has taken all his blankets from the floor. The stepping stones behind, something calls for you. Forget that day you left, they will not follow you. The vagabond who's nothing had gone wrong is standing in the clothes that you once wore.